The Wood Beyond the World. Chapter 12. The Wearing of 4 Days in the Wood Beyond the World. He arose betimes, but found no one to greet him, neither was there any sound of folk moving within the fair house. So he but broke his fast, and then went forth and wandered amongst the trees, till he found him a stream to bathe in, and after he had washed the night off him he lay down under a tree thereby for a while, but soon turned back toward the house, lest perchance the maid should come thither and he should miss her. It should be said that half a bow shot from the house on that side, i.e. due north thereof, was a little hazel brake, and round about it the trees were smaller of kind than the oaks and chestnuts he had passed through before, being mostly of birch and quicken beam and young ash, with small wood betwixt them. So now he passed through the thicket, and, coming to the edge thereof, beheld the lady and the king's son walking together hand in hand, full lovingly by seeming. He deemed it unmeet to draw back and hide him, so he went forth past them toward the house. The king's son scowled on him as he passed, but the lady, over whose beauteous face flickered the joyous morning smiles, took no more heed of him than if he had been one of the trees of the wood. But she had been so high and disdainful with him the evening before, that he thought little of that. The twain went on, skirting the hazel copse, and he could not choose but turn his eyes on them, so sorely did the lady's beauty draw them. Then befell another thing, for behind them the boughs of the hazels parted, and there stood that little evil thing, he or another of his kind. For he was quite unclad, save by his fell of yellowy brown hair, and that he was girt with a leathern girdle, wherein was stuck an ugly two-edged knife. He stood upright a moment and cast his eyes at Walter and grinned, but not as if he knew him, and scarce could Walter say whether it were the one he had seen, or another. Then he cast himself down on his belly, and fell to creeping through the long grass like a serpent, following the footsteps of the lady and her lover. And now, as he crept, Walter deemed, in his loathing, that the creature was liker to a ferret than aught else. He crept on marvelous swiftly, and was soon clean out of sight. But Walter stood staring after him for a while, and then lay down by the copside, that he might watch the house and the entry thereof. For he thought, now perchance presently will the kind maiden come hither to comfort me with a word or two. But hour passed by hour, and still she came not. And still he lay there, and thought of the maid, and longed for her kindness and wisdom, till he could not refrain his tears, and wept for the lack of her. Then he arose, and went and sat in the porch, and was very downcast of mood. But as he sat there, back comes the lady again, the king's son leading her by the hand. They entered the porch, and she passed by him so close that the odor of her raiment filled all the air about him, and the sleekness of her side nigh touched him, so that he could not fail to note that her garments were somewhat disarrayed, and that she kept her right hand, for her left the king's son held, to her bosom to hold the cloth together there, whereas the rich raiment had been torn off from her right shoulder. As they passed by him, the king's son once more scowled on him, wordless, but even more fiercely than before, and again the lady heeded him not. After they had gone on a while, he entered the hall and found it empty from end to end, and no sound in it save the tinkling of the fountain. But there was victuals set on the board. He ate and drank thereof to keep life lusty within him, and then went out again to the woodside to watch and to long, and the time hung heavy on his hands because of the lack of the fair maiden. He was of mind not to go into the house to his rest that night, but to sleep under the boughs of the forest. But a little after sunset he saw a bright-clad image moving amidst the carven images of the porch, and the king's son came forth and went straight to him and said, "Thou art to enter the house and go into thy chamber forthwith, and by no means to go forth of it betwixt sunset and sunrise. My lady will not away with thy prowling round the house in the night-tide." Therewith he turned away, and went into the house again. And Walter followed him soberly, remembering how the maid had bidden him forbear. So he went to his chamber and slept. But amidst of the night he awoke and deemed that he heard a voice not far off. So he crept out of his bed and peered around, lest, perchance, the maid had come to speak with him. But his chamber was dusk and empty. Then he went to the window and looked out, and saw the moon shining bright and white upon the greensward. And lo, the lady walking with the king's son, and he clad in thin and wanton raiment, but she in naught else save what God had given her of long, crispy yellow hair. Then was Walter ashamed to look on her, seeing that there was a man with her, and gat him back to his bed. But yet a long while ere he slept again he had the image before his eyes of the fair woman on the dewy moonlit grass. The next day matters went much the same way, and the next also, save that his sorrow was increased, and he sickened sorely of hope deferred. On the fourth day also the forenoon wore as erst. But in the heat of the afternoon Walter sought to the hazel copse, and laid him down there hard by a little clearing thereof, and slept from very weariness of grief. There, after a while, he woke with words still hanging in his ears, and he knew at once that it was they twain talking together. The king's son had just done his say, and now it was the lady beginning in her honey-sweet voice, low but strong, wherein even was a little of huskiness. She said, "Otto, belike it were well to have a little patience, till we find out what the man is and whence he cometh. It will always be easy to rid us of him. It is but a word to our dwarf king, and it will be done in a few minutes." "Patience," said the king's son angrily. "I wot not how to have patience with him. For I can see of him that he is rude and violent and headstrong, and a low-born wily one. Forsooth, he had patience enough with me the other even, when I rated him in, like the dog that he is, and he had no manhood to say one word to me. Soothly, as he followed after me, I had a mind to turn about and deal him a buffet on the face, to see if I could but draw one angry word from him." The lady laughed and said, "Well, Otto, I know not. That which thou deemest dastardy in him may be but prudence and wisdom, and he an alien, far from his friends and nigh to his foes. Perchance we shall yet try him what he is. Meanwhile I rede thee try him not with buffets, save he be weaponless and with bounden hands. Or else I deem that but a little while shalt thou be fain of thy blow." Now when Walter heard her words and the voice wherein they were said, he might not forbear being stirred by them, and to him, all lonely there, they seemed friendly. But he lay still, and the king's son answered the lady and said, "I know not what is in thine heart concerning this runagate, that thou shouldst bemock me with his valiancy, whereof thou knowest not. If thou deem me unworthy of thee, send me back safe to my father's country. I may look to have worship there, yea, and the love of fair women belike." Therewith it seemed as if he had put forth his hand to the lady to caress her, for she said, "Nay, lay not thine hand on my shoulder, for today and now it is not the hand of love, but of pride and folly, and would-be mastery. Nay, neither shalt thou rise up and leave me until thy mood is softer and kinder to me." Then was there silence betwixt them a while, and thereafter the king's son spake in a wheedling voice, "My goddess, I pray thee pardon me, but canst thou wonder that I fear thy wearying of me, and am therefore peevish and jealous? Thou so far above the queens of the world, and I a poor youth that without thee were nothing." She answered not, and he went on again. "Was it not so, O goddess, that this man of the sons of the merchants was little heedful of thee, and thy loveliness and thy majesty?" She laughed and said, "Maybe he deemed not that he had much to gain of us, seeing thee sitting by our side, and whereas we spake to him coldly and sternly and disdainfully. Withal, the poor youth was dazzled and shamefaced before us, that we could see in the eyes and the mien of him." Now this she spoke so kindly and sweetly, that again was Walter all stirred thereat. And it came into his mind that it might be she knew he was anigh and hearing her, and that she spake as much for him as for the king's son. But that one answered, "Lady, didst thou not see somewhat else in his eyes, to wit, that they had but of late looked on some fair woman other than thee? As for me, I deem it not so unlike that on the way to thine hall he may have fallen in with thy maid." He spoke in a faltering voice, as if shrinking from some storm that might come. And forsooth the lady's voice was changed as she answered, though there was no outward heat in it. Rather it was sharp and eager and cold at once. She said, "Yea, that is not ill thought of, but we may not always keep our thrall in mind. If it be so as thou deemest, we shall come to know it most like when we next fall in with her, or if she hath been shy this time, then shall she pay the heavier for it, for we will question her by the fountain in the hall as to what betid by the fountain of the rock." Spake the king's son, faltering yet more, "Lady, were it not better to question the man himself? The maid is stout-hearted, and will not be speedily quelled into a true tale, whereas the man I deem of no account." "No, no," said the lady sharply. "It shall not be." Then was she silent a while, and then she said, "How if the man should prove to be our master?" "Nay, our lady," said the king's son, "thou art jesting with me. Thou and thy might and thy wisdom, and all that thy wisdom may command, to be overmastered by a gangrel churl. But how if I will not have it command, king's son? Said the lady. I tell thee I know thine heart, but thou knowest not mine. But be at peace, for since thou hast prayed for this woman, nay, not with thy words, I wot, but with thy trembling hands, and thine anxious eyes, and knitted brow I say, since thou hast prayed for her so earnestly, she shall escape this time. But whether it will be to her gain in the long run, I misdoubt me. See thou to that, Otto, thou who hast held me in thine arms so oft. And now thou mayest depart if thou wilt. It seemed to Walter as if the king's son were dumbfoundered at her words. He answered not, and presently he rose from the ground, and went his ways slowly toward the house. The lady lay there a little while, and then went her ways also, but turned away from the house toward the wood at the other end thereof, whereby Walter had first come thither. As for Walter, he was confused in mind and shaken in spirit. And withal he seemed to see guile and cruel deeds under the talk of those two, and waxed wrathful thereat. Yet he said to himself that naught might he do, but was as one bound hand and foot, till he had seen the maid again.